Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about filmmaking and specifically filmmaking inside of Blender to help out a film. Now the concept of pre-visualization is nothing new. A lot of companies use it to actually see what their movie is going to look like before it actually gets shot. But today I just want to talk about my method of pre-visualization inside of Blender that helps me out when I make films. Before we get started, I just want to say a big thank you to all my supporters on Patreon. Links are down below if you want to join. Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about pre-visualization. Now there are 3 steps that I want to talk about pre-visualization and some other stuff that you can do to get a good result in your film. So the first part is going to be modeling, and then we're going to talk about blocking, and then finally we're going to learn how to do some camera movements and do some mock shots inside Blender. Okay, so first part is the modeling section of this video. Now I'm going to go over the basics of modeling for any filmmaker that is new to Blender and just wants to create a scene. Now for pre-visualization, you don't need to go too hard on modeling unless you're doing something that really requires a good model to work with. It also does help that you do know the correct proportions and sizes of your scene. For example, in today's video, I'm going to be working with a scene that I actually went to in person, so I know the dimensions and everything, so I can correctly model that out. Now for the basics of modeling inside Blender, we can left click to select different objects. You can see them up here. So we have this cube. To add objects into your scene, you can hit Shift A. This will pop up this menu, and then you have all these different meshes, all this different stuff. You can add lights, cameras, all that stuff. So if you want to add a mesh, we can add a sphere, anything like that. And so now we have a sphere in our scene. Let's go ahead and delete that and just work with the default cube that automatically comes with Blender. Okay, so to start out, we need to know the basic transformation options inside of Blender. The first one is translate, so we can hit G to translate the object. This basically moves the object around. So you can see it's moving around based on my camera right now. Next is to rotate, which is R. So you can rotate it around again to the camera. But if you don't want to do it to the camera, you can also double tap R, and that'll do the trackball method, just another way of rotating. And then finally we have scale, which is S, and that will scale the object up and down. Now with all of these methods of changing around the object, we can actually affect these on different axes. At the top you can see this little chart right up here. We have the Z axis, X, and Y. And those are also labeled by these little lines in the viewport. Okay, so all you have to do to transform objects on a specific axis are to press the corresponding button of what you want to do. So for me, I'm just going to demonstrate by hitting G to move the object. And now let's say I just want to move it up, so that is in the Z axis. So I'm just going to hit Z on my keyboard, and now it is locked to the Z axis. You can also do it to the other axes, which are X and then Y as well. So just press one of those after you press your transform button. You can also do these with all of the other ones, such as rotate and then scale. Okay, so now that we know the basics of our object, let's learn how to navigate the scene. So first of all, if you have a mouse, you can middle mouse click and hold that down, and that actually rotates around the scene. Now if you hit Shift and middle mouse click, you can actually translate around the scene like that. And then if you want to zoom in, just use the scroll wheel and zoom in and out. You can also use this little wheel up here if you're used to other programs to actually move around like this. Okay, so now to the modeling of our object. So now that we know how to translate and affect our object, we actually need to change the object and make it its own model and everything. Okay, so now I'm just going to show you some basic keystrokes that I use when modeling for basic stuff inside of pre-visualization. Okay, so to start modeling out our object, we're going to go into edit mode. Now you can either come up here and select edit mode like that, or the shortcut is tab. So we're just going to go on that, and now you can see that we have all these vertices selected and everything. Up at the top, we have 3 different modes. We have vertex select, we have edge select, and then face select. So all these affect the different objects of the face. So edge select selects the edges, and then vertex select selects the vertices, and then of course face select selects face. Now these are also mapped to 1, 2, and 3 on your keyboard, so I'm just going to press those for the rest of this tutorial. Okay, so now that we know we can select different faces and everything, you can move them around, rotate them, scale them, all that stuff. But now we need to actually create new geometry and basically model out a object. So we're going to start out simple and make a basic chair inside Blender. So to do that, we need to add more vertices to the object. Now the easiest way to do this for a chair is to go ahead and add a edge loop. An edge loop is basically cutting the object in half, and then you can position that wherever you want. So for example, if we hit Control R, that is to add a edge loop, you can now see that there is this yellow line going throughout the object. And if I move it around, you can see that it's changing the orientation of it, depending on what your cursor is closest to. Now if I click, you'll notice that it adds a little cut through our object like that, and I can actually move it around. And so for our chair, I'm just going to move it to the back, just so we can create a little back face. Okay, so we have essentially cut the cube in half now. So now I can affect this face separately from this face, so that is nice. Now for our chair, we're going to go ahead and cut it to make the arms as well. So I need to cut it right here. So this little face is going to be our arm. And then cut it again right here. Again, that is Control R. Okay, so now you can see that when we do edge select, that basically puts us in the edge mode right up here. We need to change it to face select, so hit 3. And then what we can do is go ahead and extrude the faces. Now extrusion will basically create a new face and move that up and connect faces to it. Let's just demonstrate that right now by creating the back of our chair. So let's just select these 3 things back here. You can hold down Shift and click those. And then to extrude, we're going to press E on our keyboard. And as you can see, this makes a new extrusion upwards, and it basically extrudes out this little back. Okay, so that is the extrusion tool. Now to finish off this object, let's just select the arm, and then let's hit E to extrude those up again. And now we have a simple little chair inside of Blender. Now you can get real fancy with this and mess around with the objects to get results that you like, but this is basically the form of modeling that you'll use all the time when you're doing pre-visualization. Okay, so let's just delete this real quick and make some complex objects in our scene that I'm going to be using later. So first of all, let's create a wall that I'm going to be using. So I'm just going to Shift A, add a mesh cube, and then we can go ahead and edit this. Okay, so we're just going to hit S to scale. And then I know I want to scale in the X axis, so let's hit X. And then I can just move those in, and now it's basically as thin as a wall. And then I'm just going to hit G, and I'm going to move that up in the Z direction, and I can actually hold Control to snap that up 1 unit. Okay, so now that I have all this, we can go ahead and go into edit mode by hitting Tab. Then I'm just going to go into face select and select this face. Then instead of extruding it, I'm just going to hit G, and then on the Y axis, like that, because we're on the green line. I'm just going to move this about right here. Looks good. And then I want to select the top of this and move this up on the Z, so GZ to move it up on the Z. Okay, so we basically have our first wall right now. However, we need to extrude it and add the other faces of our wall. So what I'm going to do is hold Control R to add a loop cut. So let's click on the middle right here. And then I'm just going to move it all the way to the side right here, just so we have a little bit of wall that we're working with on this side. So now let's go back into face select, so 3. Let's click this face, and now we need to move this face out here. So to do that, we can hit E to extrude and just extrude it out however long we want it to be. And then you get the gist. We can hit Control R, loop cut, put it right there, 3, face select, hit E to extrude, and bam, now we have a full wall that we can work with. Now this wall actually resembles the set that I'm working with, but for you, you just want to model out the set however it looks for you. Now for the wall, there is a door over on this side, so let's go ahead and create that, which is super simple. We're just gonna again add another loop cut. So I know the wall, the door is about this thick, so right there. I'm just gonna create that thickness. But it doesn't extend to the roof of the wall, so let's just add one going sideways. And it's about that big, let's say. Now we have a problem. We have this door, but it's not cut out. So what we can do is go into face select, select this face. Then you can hit X, and that will delete the faces. And delete the faces on that side as well. And so now we have a little doorway. However, you will see if we kind of zoom in here that the doorway is a little bit cut out. There aren't really faces right here. And so it depends on your project if that really matters or not. So one way we can fill in these little holes on the wall right here is to actually mess around in edit mode. So let's come up here. We need to go into wireframe. And so now we can see through the object. And we need to go into vertex select, so up here. And now we can see and mess around with the individual vertices. So basically we just need to select all the vertices that are going to make up each side of our door. So for example, if I want to mess around with this side of the wall right here, I need to select the 2 vertices at the top. And then to make the little side of the door, we also need these 2 vertices at the bottom. And so now let's go into the solid view and just to see what that does. So we can see that there's a hole right here. Now if we press F, that will basically enclose this space that we have selected and make a new face from those vertices. Okay, so let's do those for the rest. So go into the wireframe. Then let's just select these, shift select these, and hit F. That made a new face. And finally for these down here, let's just select all those and hit F again. And now if we go into solid view, you will see that our door is now enclosed and it is looking nice. Okay guys, so that is the basic modeling of our scene. I'm going to go ahead and go forward and show you the finished model of our scene. Okay guys, so here is our final scene all modeled out. Now I was actually there when they were doing production design, so I was able to get the layout of the tables and the couch and everything. So this is very important for our next step, which is blocking. Now in my scene I have 2 characters, however you may block for as many characters as you want to. So if we actually come down to the material preview, I have actually done different materials for the different people. And how you do that is simply just select your object, come down to the material tab right down here in the properties window, and it should show you this menu right here. You just want to click new, and then depending on how complex you want it, you can mess around with all these settings, but the main one I usually mess around with is the base color. And if you're wondering how I got these characters, all I did was add a cylinder right here. Then I just SZ to scale that up a bit. And then if you go into edit mode and then hit Shift A, you should see that we can add a mesh in edit mode. But this is different than adding a mesh in object mode because these objects are now parented together. So if I move this up to where it should be, now if I get out of it, they should be its own object and everything. Okay, so blocking is really fun inside Blender. You can do it real time and basically block out the scene how you would in real life. So let me just show you the basics right now. So we have our scene inside of here and our 2 characters. Now if I select this character and I hit G, we can see that it moves around and everything. Now if you remember from earlier, we can hit G, X, Y, stuff like that. However, we can't really control those both at the same time without affecting the Z-axis. So to affect our object to make it stay on our floor plane and not be affected by the Z-axis, we can hit G to move the object. And then if we hit Shift Z, we can move the object on every axis but the Z-axis, which basically means that our character remains on the floor and we can actually move the character around the scene and it stays on the floor. Now this is a really cool feature inside of Blender. You can actually move your characters throughout the scene and everything. So now what we can do is basically use that and then have Blender remember our movement and then apply that to be our blocking. Okay, so let's do that. Now if I go ahead and play Blender down here, you can also hit space. And if I start moving this guy around, again Shift Z to get that effect, you'll notice that if we go back, nothing has really happened, and that's actually because we haven't placed any keyframes in our animation. Now the manual way to add keyframes is to hit I, and that will bring up the keyframe menu. Now you can set the location, rotation, scale, or all these different keyframes. And then you would come to a later part, set a different keyframe, and it would interpolate the animation in between. However, there's this button down here that we can see is auto keying. It basically does automatic keyframes, so whatever you do inside of Blender, it'll make a keyframe for it, no matter if you press that menu or not. The downside to this is that it makes a keyframe for everything, so rotation, location, and scale at the same time. You can't really do it separately. But since we're just doing blocking and we're not going to change the rotation or the scale, we can just affect them all together at the same time. Okay, so let's turn this on. And now if we play our animation by hitting space and then G, Shift Z, and move it around like that. Now if we go back, we can see that Blender has remembered the animation, and we have basically created real-time animation. Now if I come down here, you will see that there is now a line of keyframes right here, and you can actually affect those the same way that you can move objects in viewport. So you can scale it, you can move it with G, and then I don't think you can rotate it, but scale and moving does work. Okay, so that is the basic setup of what we're going to be doing in blocking. Is going to be playing our scene and then recording the movements of our character. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete these keyframes by hitting delete down there, and then go to the first frame of our animation. Now you do want to set your in keyframe to be as long as possible. I'm going to set mine down here to be a 1500. I find that that's a pretty good thing for our scene. Now to demonstrate how to block, I'm just going to block out my scene. Now I do know the blocking of our scene, so you want to make sure that you know that before you do this. So now we can just hit space, then G, and then Shift Z, and start moving our character. Okay, so I just finished my animation. Let's just take a look through it. Now, if you didn't like this, you can of course just delete all this and retry again. That's the nice thing about this. If you mess up, you can always redo it. But if I just scrub through out here, you can see that I have the quicken version of my blocking. Now, if you were actually doing this, I recommend get the timing correct. Maybe you videotape the blocking rehearsal or anything like that. Just to get the timing, but this is just a basic playthrough. And so now that I'm done with my pink character, I can actually go ahead and do my blue character as well. So let's do that. Okay, so there we go. We have the blocking now finished for our scene. We have all the characters moving and everything. So that is looking good. However, you will notice that's a little choppy, and for the sake of pre-visualization, we'd like it to be a little more smooth. So we can actually mess around with the animation to get what we want. So let's just go ahead and bring out another window inside of Blender by coming here and then just clicking and dragging this out. Now stick with me, this might get a little complicated, but I swear it's very easy in the end. So we're going to come up and change the tab to be our graph editor. This is basically a graph version of our keyframes. So I have our blue character selected, and if I drop this menu down, we can see that Blender automatically created all these different keyframes. If we just hit A, these are all the keyframes that Blender created. So you'll see that it's very jagged in some areas. So what we need to do is go ahead and smoothen those out. So to smoothen those out, we do want keyframes on every single keyframe of our animation. So to do that, we're just going to hit Shift, Alt, and then O on our keyboard. And now you can see that that's filled in any blank spots with keyframes. And now to smoothen it out, all we have to do is hit Alt and O, and that will slowly smooth out our things. You can see that this curve up here is getting a lot smoother. And so just hit that a few times. I usually stick around 10 to 20. Don't go too further than that because the keyframes will actually become too smooth and you'll start to lose some of the movement that you made. So now if we just scrub throughout this animation now, we can see that it's a lot smoother and doesn't jet around as much as before. So let's do it to the pink character as well. So I'm just going to go to the start right here. Hit A to select all of the keyframes. Then we're just going to hit Shift Alt O and then Alt O just a couple times to smoothen that out. You do want to make sure your cursor is on this window. If your cursor is over here or in this window down here, it won't really work. It has to be in this window. Okay, so that has now smoothened out both of our characters. So now the blocking is a lot more smooth and easy to work with. We can just right click in between here and join the areas to close that out. Okay guys, so that is all of blocking finished and complete. Now we are actually ready to move on to the most exciting part, and that is to actually do some camera work. Okay, so for cameras inside Blender, it's super easy. We're just going to hit Shift A. We're going to add in a camera. Now you can either hit 0 on your numpad if you have one, like that, or the button up here to go to the camera view. Now there are many different options that we can do inside of Blender to actually affect our camera. Now we can of course translate it and do all the stuff as before. So R to rotate, let's double tap R and just move it like that, then rotate it. Just so we have a nice basic shot, but you can also G to move it, and then GX to move it like that, all that different stuff. Before we do anything else, let's turn down this auto keyframing, just so we don't have Blender automatically creating keyframes like it did here. Okay, so now to change the camera settings inside of Blender, we have this little panel down here. Now you want to select this camera properties window, and then inside of here you have all these different settings for your camera. You can set the focal length. And then down here, if you want a depth of field, you can select that, set the f-stop, anything like that. The focus object, say if I wanted to focus on my character right here, I can set that to be my focus object, and then change around the f-stop like that, and now we have a shallow depth of field. Okay, so you have a lot of options to mess around with inside the camera. However, how do you do movement inside of the camera? Okay, so Blender has many ways to move around the camera. However, like before, we want to do this in real time and not really have to deal with manual keyframing. So what we can do is come over here. We want to make sure we're in the correct camera. You can actually have multiple cameras in your scene. So let's go ahead and add another camera just to demonstrate that. And let's just kind of move this back here out of the way so it's a different view as before. So say I wanted to go into this camera now. We have the two cameras over here, but if I select this camera, it still goes to the previous one. So to select the camera that is the active camera, we have to come over here, and there's this little green camera button beside every single camera in the scene. And you can see right now the top one is highlighted and the bottom one is not. Basically the one that is highlighted is going to be the active one and the one that it automatically goes to. So let's select this one, and now if we go into the camera view, we should see this is the active one. Okay, so that is just a little aside. Let's go and delete this and make this our default camera. Okay, so in Blender, there's actually a way to fly around in your scene. If you come up to View, and then we're going to go to Navigation, and come all the way down to this Walk Navigation, you can see that with WASD, like any video game, you can actually fly around the scene, and then with Shift, you can actually fly a little bit faster around the scene. And you can also look with your mouse just like any first-person shooter. Now this is really nice for navigating the scene inside of Blender. However, we can actually use this to actually have manual control over our camera. Now this part is totally optional, but if you come to View, Navigation, and then right-click this Walk Navigation, you can hit this Change shortcut. And I usually like to set mine to Shift F So whenever I hit Shift F, that'll automatically set the walk navigation to start. Okay, so to actually manipulate our camera, we need to be in the camera view. So right here, and now if we hit Shift F or the walk navigation, we can actually move around our camera with the mouse. Now we can actually walk around and everything as well. However, if you are on a tripod, you don't really want to do that. But if you're on a dolly, I could see you also using the walk around method. So this is a very cool way to actively move around your camera in real time. So you can basically do real-time camera operating in your scene. One quick tip is if you hit G, you can actually activate gravity, and depending on the size of the scene, you can actually walk around and it be affected by the floor and everything. So say I go up on this table, I'm now on the table. So if you're a cameraman, you might want to do this. It's really up to you. So in this mode, if you want to go back to your original position, you can right click and that'll get you out of the walk navigation. But say you find a good position where you want the camera to be, you can left click and that'll actually keep the camera in its last position. Okay, so I'm just going to position my camera where I want it to be. So right around here. Okay, so now let's reactivate that auto keyframing feature. Again, this will make Blender automatically remember all the movements that we do for whatever object we have selected. Okay, so now all that's left to do is to go ahead and do the camera operating for this shot. Now we can hit space and then Shift F, and we're just gonna do our camera operating as usual. Okay, so I just recorded all my camera movements. Here it is. We can just see it tracks the characters throughout our shot and everything. So like before, it's very choppy. So let's actually smoothen it now, and it's the same process as before. So again, we're just going to click and drag out a window, go up here to Graph Editor. Then we're just going to hit A to select all the keyframes, Shift Alt O to add keyframes in between all the other keyframes, and then we're just going to hit Alt O and smoothen that out a bit. So now if we view this camera animation, let's go ahead and right click, close the areas. So now you can see our camera work is much smoother and ready for pre-visualization. Now you can do as many camera setups as you want. Let's just add a new camera. I'm just going to bring this over here. Let's go into the camera view. So right here I went into the previous camera. Let's just select the new one right here. And then Shift F, just going to place it, let's say right here. I can change around the focal length and everything like that. Let's just delete that keyframe that it automatically created. And now if we play the scene, we're just going to do the same thing and track with this new camera setup. Okay, so now if we come up, we now have two cameras in our scene that are following our characters. Now if you want to stay organized inside Blender, you can right click up here, do a new collection. You can double click to rename that. So I'm just going to name the camera. Then we can select these and put that in that new folder. And so now we have these different options up here. This button means that it's not seen in the viewport or the render, like so. This means that it's not seen in the viewport, however, it's still rendered. And then finally, this is only seen in the viewport, however, it is not rendered. The final thing I want to show you is how to do an overlay for any letterbox or anything you want to put on top of the camera view. To do that, we're just going to select the camera we want to put that on. We're going to come down here to background images, make sure that's selected, then add a image. We're going to go to image and then open that up. Now we can just open up any overlay that we want. Right here I have a 2.2 to 1 overlay for a letterbox, so we're just going to open that up. And you should see that nothing really happens. However, we do see something down here. And that's actually because we have the depth set to back instead of front. So if we set it to front, now we can see that we have a nice little overlay of some letterboxes on our scene, so you can frame up for that if you want. You can also come down here and change the opacity of that as well if you want that to be seen more or less. Okay guys, so that is all I have for this tutorial today. Let's go ahead and jump in the final version of this scene that I made. Okay guys, so here's the final scene that I made and actually used for the project that I worked on. You can see that we have many things going on right now. We have all the grids that we used inside of the studio and all of the lights that we are planning to use. So we have some lighting stuff set up back here. And I actually made each individual collection be its own specific part. So right here we can turn off the lights just to get a nice little view of what's going on. Okay, so we use the blocking as before. So it's basically the same thing, however the timing actually works out and everything. And then you can see all these cameras moving around, and we actually did specific custom animations for each of those cameras using the method that I showed you guys earlier. So I have all these shots right here. You can actually come over here and name these as specific shots as well. So that's what we did for there. And then all I did to render these out is if you come here, let's go to Material Preview. All I did was basically zoom in all the way to my footage. And then if you come up here to View, you can actually viewport render animation right here, and that'll basically just quickly render out the animation depending on what you can see in the viewport. So if I just render out a viewport image right now, so viewport render image, you'll see that we basically have this shading, and you can see it rendered in no time. So you can pop these things out. I think the longest one took me maybe 2 minutes to render out, and that is really nice since this is a crazy long animation. So that's just really nice for some easy, quick visualization. Now you can also do it on cycles, and that it has a lot of other benefits, such as lighting and getting some directional lighting and everything in your scene. However, that is more taxing, and that takes a lot longer to render. Another option is just rendering on Eevee. So if we come over to the render engine and switch that to Eevee, now if we just go ahead and render out an image, that rendered out pretty fast, but not as fast as the viewport render. If you are rendering, however, you do want to make sure you set the location that it's going to save. So we're going to come over here. Now this is the output folder that you're going to output to, so this is where it's going to be saved on your computer. Then you just want to change the file format to be FFmpeg video. And then down here you want the container to be MP4. H.264 is fine for what I do. And then the output quality, I always like to set that to high. And now whenever you render the animation or come to viewport render animation, that will save to whatever file you have set right here. But you can see that there's a lot of stuff that you can do for pre-visualization. We also did some lighting inside of Blender to kind of get a basic idea of what the lighting was going to be like for the day. And I did some renders of this just to see what it would look like and everything. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do that I didn't teach you about today. But today was just the basics of pre-visualization and all the stuff that you can do to help out your film project inside of Blender. Okay, so hopefully that was enough information for non-Blender users to actually start using Blender as a pre-visualization tool for their films. But anyways, guys, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thanks all my supporters. The support on the channel has been awesome recently, so I really appreciate that. Anyways, guys, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys later. Peace.